What if I told you that the most private, most disciplined, and most famously blunt member of the royal family had a secret opinion about Harry and Meghan's Oprah interview so explosive that it could change the way you remember that night forever? Imagine Princess Anne, the daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, a woman known for never indulging drama and never playing to the cameras, sitting back and declaring, in her no-nonsense way, that the interview wasn't just damaging, it was the ultimate betrayal. Not just a betrayal of the monarchy, but of family, of loyalty, of the Queen herself. That's where this story begins, with the idea that Anne, the royal who doesn't mince words, saw Meghan and Harry's truth, not as truth at all, but as a carefully packaged act that detonated like a nuclear bomb inside the palace. Think back to March 2021. The world was still in the grip of a global pandemic. People were locked indoors, hungry for distraction, desperate for drama, and then, there it was. 2 hours of television unlike anything the monarchy had endured in decades. Meghan, glamorous yet solemn, sitting opposite Oprah Winfrey in that California garden, confessing isolation, mental health struggles, and insinuating racism at the very heart of the royal family. Harry joining her midway, visibly tense, accusing his own father of cutting him off and hinting at betrayal by his brother. Millions watched live. Social media exploded. Newspapers spun headlines as though Buckingham Palace had been turned upside down overnight. It wasn't just an interview. It was an earthquake, a story so global that even leaders and celebrities weighed in. And yet, behind those gilded walls, imagine Princess Anne quietly shaking her head, seeing it for what she allegedly believed it was, not a cry for help, but a calculated strike. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Why does this matter now, years later? Because we're not just talking about public opinion. We're talking about the one family member whose word carries an unusual weight. Princess Anne has always been the royal with grit, the one who famously survived an attempted kidnapping by fighting back, the one who clocks in more royal engagements than almost anyone else, the one who rarely, if ever, indulges in theatrics. If she, of all people, truly described the interview as a betrayal, if she believed parts of it were misleading, then suddenly the story isn't just about Meghan and Harry speaking their truth. It's about the possibility that the Queen herself was misrepresented, that millions of viewers were swept up in a narrative that wasn't entirely accurate. That's the knife-edge tension here. The reason why this conversation is not just historical gossip, but a living question about truth, loyalty, and manipulation. So let me ask you, when you first watched that Oprah interview, what did you feel? Did you sympathize with Meghan when she described feeling silenced, trapped, suicidal? Did you side with Harry when he spoke of being financially cut off? Or did you feel an unease, a sense that something wasn't quite adding up? Princess Anne, according to reports and whispers from insiders, leaned toward that unease. She saw contradiction. She saw exaggeration. She saw wounds inflicted on her mother, the Queen, not by outsiders or enemies, but by her own grandson. And for Anne, that wasn't just damaging. That was unforgivable. Let's set the scene inside Buckingham Palace when the interview aired. The Queen was reportedly at Windsor. Staff members huddled around televisions, watching with their jaws clenched. Phones buzzed, messages flew, statements were drafted. And then the claims landed like grenades. There were concerns about how dark Archie's skin might be. I just didn't want to be alive anymore. They didn't want him to be a prince. Words that pierced the monarchy's carefully crafted image of dignity and service. And while the world debated, and is said to have muttered something devastating, that this wasn't just a PR nightmare. It was, in her words, a nuclear bomb. A weapon fired not by strangers, but by family. That phrase, a nuclear bomb, matters, because when Anne chooses words, they're blunt, sharp, and unfiltered. She doesn't play in metaphors. She doesn't romanticize. She calls things what they are. For her to describe the Oprah interview in those terms reveals the scale of betrayal she felt. Nuclear bombs don't just wound. They annihilate, leaving destruction so wide it cannot be ignored. And if Anne saw it that way, then we must ask, did Meghan and Harry intend to annihilate? Or were they simply caught in their own truth-telling moment that spiraled beyond their control? Now, let's not forget the Queen. This wasn't just about palace politics or tabloid battles. This was about a 94-year-old monarch, still grieving her husband's declining health, still bearing the weight of a nation during a pandemic. Hearing her own grandson paint the institution she had devoted her life to as cold, unfeeling, even cruel. Princess Anne reportedly revealed that her mother was deeply, deeply hurt, and not just as a sovereign, but as a grandmother. Imagine that. To give decades of your life to service, to try to steady a family through scandal after scandal, and then to watch your grandson sit in front of millions, accusing your family of bigotry, and described her mother's pain as personal, raw, and shattering. And for Anne, who guards her mother fiercely, that was the ultimate insult. And here's where things twist further. Anne allegedly pointed to inconsistencies in the interview itself. Let's take Archie's title. Meghan insisted he was denied the title of prince, implying discrimination. But the truth, at least according to royal protocol, is that Archie, as a great-grandchild of the monarch, wasn't entitled to that title at birth. The rules would have changed once Charles became king. And, being meticulous, allegedly fumed that this detail was twisted to look like racism. She saw deception where others saw discrimination. And she wasn't shy in saying it. Let's pause for a moment. If Anne's perspective is correct, if the Queen's pain was amplified by misleading claims, then what does that mean for how we, the public, consumed that interview? Were we manipulated by clever editing, by selective storytelling? Or was this simply the clash of perception, Meghan and Harry's lived experience versus the cold rigidity of royal rules? That's the crux of the tension. And it's why Anne's alleged comments still matter today. They force us to reconsider what we thought we knew. And think about the stakes. That interview wasn't just gossip. It was a global spectacle that influenced politics, media, and even international relations. Politicians in America weighed in. Activists pointed to the monarchy as a symbol of systemic racism. Opinion polls showed public trust in the monarchy dip sharply. For Anne, a woman who has devoted her life to preserving royal duty, the interview wasn't just emotional. It was existential. She saw it as a direct threat to the crown itself. And perhaps, in her mind, Meghan and Harry knew exactly what they were doing. So why bring this up now? Because history has a way of rewriting itself. At the time, Meghan and Harry's words felt revolutionary, brave, heartbreaking. But as the years pass, cracks appear. Facts are disputed, contexts shift, and voices like Anne's, once muted or whispered, resurface. The blunt royal who never wanted celebrity attention suddenly becomes the truth teller, the one willing to call it what it was, betrayal. The question is, do we believe her? Do we side with the family that closed ranks, or the couple who bared their wounds? That's the emotional tug-of-war this story drags us into. But here's where I'll leave you, right at the edge of something bigger. Because Anne's words weren't just about Meghan's claims or Harry's anger. They were about the cracks within the family itself, cracks that had been forming long before that Oprah interview ever aired. Cracks that Anne, with her sharp eye and sharper tongue, allegedly warned about years earlier. And if the palace had listened then, perhaps the bomb might never have detonated. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Why does it matter that Princess Anne was the one who allegedly called Harry and Meghan's Oprah interview a nuclear bomb? Think about it for a moment. This isn't Prince Charles, cautious and diplomatic. It isn't Prince William, always balancing the weight of future kingship with the need to appear composed. It isn't Prince Andrew, mired in his own scandals and silenced by disgrace. This is Princess Anne, the no-nonsense, workhorse royal, the one who never courts headlines, never sugarcoats her words, and never plays the victim. The one who, for decades, has been described as the hardest-working royal, quietly racking up hundreds of engagements each year while ignoring the noise. For Anne to speak out, even privately, was monumental. Because if she had something to say, you can bet it wasn't idle chatter. It was raw, unfiltered truth. Now, let's rewind a little. Who is Princess Anne really? The second child and only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. She grew up in the shadow of her older brother Charles. Yet from the start, she was cut from a different cloth. While Charles was sensitive, intellectual, and often hesitant, and was blunt, practical, and famously headstrong, she never hid behind courtly manners when plain speech would do. Remember the time a reporter asked her about the possibility of becoming queen if something happened to Charles? She snapped back with icy precision, not bloody likely. That was, and in a nutshell. Direct, unpretentious, unwilling to play games. It's that same and who, when confronted with the chaos unleashed by Meghan and Harry's interview, didn't mince her words. Allegedly, she looked at the spectacle and said what others only whispered. This was betrayal. And not just betrayal of the monarchy as an institution. And this was betrayal of her mother, the Queen. The woman who had given her life to service, who weathered decades of scandals, who always put duty first. Anne's defense of her mother has always been ferocious. And that's why her alleged comments about the interview carried such sting. Let me ask you, when you think of the royal who would never tolerate nonsense, who comes to mind? Isn't it Anne? She's the one who once scolded photographers with a curt, "naff off." The one who endured an attempted kidnapping in 1974 and, instead of collapsing in fear, famously told her attacker, "not bloody likely," when he demanded she get out of the car. She wasn't cowed then, and she isn't cowed now, and has been consistent her entire life. She doesn't play victim, she doesn't wallow in drama, and she doesn't seek sympathy. That's why Meghan and Harry's emotional interview clashed so violently with her worldview. For Anne, problems aren't solved by broadcasting them to millions. They're handled privately, with quiet resolve. To watch her nephew and his wife sit with Oprah, airing grievances, painting the monarchy as cruel and racist, well, it went against everything and stood for. She would see it not as courage, but as weakness. Not as honesty, but as betrayal. But here's where it gets interesting. Anne's reputation inside the palace has always been that of the truth-teller. The one family members turn to when they want the unvarnished version of reality. Even her own brothers have admitted she's blunt to the point of discomfort. She once reportedly told Charles that his endless philosophizing was navel-gazing and pointless. She has little patience for self-pity. And Meghan's interview, with its tears, dramatic pauses, and carefully staged revelations, likely struck and as the very thing she despises, self-indulgence dressed up as suffering. Think of it this way. If you were sitting in Buckingham Palace during that broadcast, would you rather have Charles's careful words, William's measured silence, or Anne's biting honesty? It was, and who allegedly summed it up in a single devastating image, a nuclear bomb. A weapon that doesn't just bruise, but obliterates. For Anne, Harry and Meghan weren't just airing grievances. They were detonating the monarchy's stability. And let's not forget, Anne has a long history of sniffing out trouble before others see it. Years ago, when Meghan first entered the royal orbit, there were whispers that Anne was skeptical. She allegedly doubted whether Meghan would adapt to royal life, whether she understood the duty-first culture of the monarchy, and, who had lived it her whole life, recognized the warning signs. The craving for celebrity, the Hollywood shine, the desire for freedom without the weight of responsibility. She saw it, she warned about it, and, according to those close to the palace, her warnings were ignored. Now ask yourself, if someone like Anne raised red flags early on and the family brushed them aside, doesn't that make her eventual condemnation of the Oprah interview all the more cutting? It wasn't just about the interview. It was about years of ignored advice, years of watching a storm build, years of watching the family turn a blind eye. So when Meghan and Harry sat with Oprah and didn't just see an interview, she saw the culmination of everything she had predicted. But here's the twist. Anne isn't the type to gloat, to say, "I told you so." That's not her style. Instead, she allegedly delivered her verdict with the same brutal simplicity she's always used. It wasn't "I was right." It was "this is betrayal." It was the kind of blunt truth that leaves no room for debate. Let's dig deeper into her character, because understanding Anne is the key to understanding why her words matter so much. She has always been seen as the monarch's most loyal child. Not the heir, not the spare, but the worker. The one who never complains, never seeks the spotlight, but always gets the job done. The one who, even in her 70s, still travels across the country, opening schools, shaking hands, representing her family without fuss. She has built her identity around duty. And that's why she would see Harry's rejection of duty, his abandonment of the monarchy, as unforgivable. Now picture this, and watching the interview in silence. Each accusation like a dagger. The Queen's pain growing heavier with each passing minute. And then, breaking that silence with words sharp as steel. This is a nuclear bomb. It wasn't dramatic flourish. It was a diagnosis. She was telling the family that this wasn't just another scandal, not another tabloid mess, but a wound that would scar the monarchy forever. And she wasn't wrong. Look at the aftermath. Public trust in the monarchy dipped. Debates about racism in the institution raged. Politicians and celebrities weighed in. The Queen herself was forced to issue a rare personal statement. Recollections may vary. That was Elizabeth's careful response. But her response was brutal honesty. The contrast says everything. So let me put it to you. Whose words do you believe reflect the reality inside Buckingham Palace more accurately? The Queen's measured diplomacy or Anne's unfiltered truth? One spoke for the world. The other spoke for the family. Both are powerful, but only one cuts to the bone. And here's the cliffhanger you need to sit with. Anne's alleged criticisms of Meghan and Harry didn't stop with the Oprah interview. She reportedly had even harsher things to say, not just about Meghan's claims, but about Harry himself, the nephew she once adored, the boy she saw grow up in Diana's shadow. For Anne, his betrayal wasn't just shocking. It was heartbreaking. But what came next would turn her disappointment in Meghan into something far more devastating. An accusation aimed directly at Harry himself. What if I told you that the night Meghan and Harry sat across from Oprah wasn't just a television interview? It was, in Princess Anne's words, the detonation of a bomb that would shake the monarchy to its very core? The stage was set in Montecito, California, on a warm spring evening in 2021. A picturesque garden. Oprah Winfrey, the Queen of Television herself, sitting across from the Duchess of Sussex. Cameras capturing every pause, every sigh, every dramatic tear. Millions tuned in, not just across the United States, but across the globe. And in those 2 hours, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex didn't just tell their side of the story. They unleashed accusations that would reverberate from Hollywood to Buckingham Palace. But let's strip away the glamorous setup and think about what was really happening here. For Meghan and Harry, this wasn't simply an interview. It was their manifesto, their declaration of independence, their chance to frame themselves as victims of a cold, archaic institution that cared more about rules than about people. And for the royal family, watching thousands of miles away, this wasn't just uncomfortable, it was war. Princess Anne, ever the blunt observer, is said to have muttered afterward that the interview was nothing less than a nuclear bomb. And once you revisit what was said, you start to see why. Let's dive into Meghan's most shocking claims. The world gasped when she revealed that during her pregnancy with Archie, unnamed royals expressed concerns about how dark his skin might be. Stop there for a moment. That single line ignited a firestorm. For the first time, the House of Windsor was publicly accused of racism. Not whispered in tabloids, not implied in vague gossip, but declared by a member of the family itself. Think about how that landed. The Queen had spent decades cultivating the monarchy's image as a unifying force, a symbol of dignity above politics. And in one moment, Meghan suggested that behind the palace walls lurked prejudice. The story wasn't just royal drama anymore. It became a cultural flashpoint. Now, add to that Meghan's admission of suicidal thoughts. She told Oprah she just didn't want to be alive anymore, and claimed that when she reached out for help, palace officials turned her away. That revelation hit like lightning. Here was a duchess, married into the most famous family on earth, saying she was abandoned in her darkest hour. Imagine how ordinary viewers felt. The monarchy, once painted as a fairy tale, suddenly looked like a gilded cage. The sympathy was overwhelming. Headlines screamed. Hashtags trended. Overnight, Meghan was cast as the brave truth-teller, while the monarchy was framed as cold, uncaring, even dangerous. And then came Harry. Joining Meghan midway, he dropped his own bombs. He revealed that his father, Prince Charles, had stopped taking his calls. He suggested his brother William was trapped, just as he had been, but too scared to admit it. He accused his family of failing to support him. For viewers, it was heartbreaking. A son estranged from his father, a brother torn from his sibling, a prince who no longer felt safe in his own country. But for the palace, this was betrayal on live television. Now ask yourself, did Meghan and Harry understand the magnitude of what they were saying? Did they know that by framing their story this way, they weren't just criticizing the institution, they were directly wounding the Queen, Charles, William, and everyone connected to the monarchy? Princess and certainly thought so. To her, this wasn't bravery. This was calculated destruction. And that's why she described it as a nuclear bomb. Not just damage control required, but scorched earth. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, the palace was in crisis mode. Advisors scrambled to draft a response. The Queen's now famous statement, "Recollections may vary," was crafted with surgical precision. It was a message meant to calm the storm without escalating the war. But make no mistake, behind the walls of Windsor Castle, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The Queen, at 94, was reportedly devastated. Prince Charles looked humiliated. Prince William, blindsided. And Anne, she didn't mince words. She allegedly told confidants that this was the single greatest act of betrayal the family had endured in decades. But let's pause here and reflect on why this particular interview hurt so deeply. The monarchy had survived scandal before. Princess Diana's infamous Panorama interview in 1995 exposed Charles's infidelity and painted her as the wronged wife. Prince Andrew's disastrous 2019 interview about Jeffrey Epstein brought disgrace. Yet somehow, Meghan and Harry's Oprah interview cut deeper. Why? Because it wasn't just about personal grievances. It was about attacking the crown itself. Racism, neglect, isolation. These weren't just family issues. They were charges that struck at the monarchy's very legitimacy. And here's the contradiction that Anne couldn't stomach. Meghan and Harry claimed they wanted privacy. They said they were stepping back to escape the relentless glare of the media. Yet here they were, sitting with the world's most famous interviewer, sharing their most intimate grievances with millions. To Anne, who had spent her entire life quietly serving, this smelled less like truth and more like performance. She allegedly described it as airing dirty laundry for the world to see, and she wasn't wrong. Now, think about the power of timing. The interview aired while Prince Philip, the Queen's husband of over 70 years, lay in hospital. The Queen was juggling the duties of state in the middle of a global pandemic. The monarchy was already stretched thin, and in that fragile moment, Harry and Meghan dropped their bomb. For Anne, it wasn't just betrayal, it was cruelty. She saw it as a calculated move, one designed to inflict maximum damage. And let's not forget the visual imagery. Meghan in her black dress, cradling her baby bump. Oprah leaning forward with shock, her hand clutching her chest. Harry sitting stiffly, his body angled toward Meghan as though bracing for impact. Every frame of that interview was choreographed to pull on heartstrings. And it worked. But behind the scenes, Anne saw manipulation. She believed it wasn't coincidence that Meghan and Harry painted themselves as victims while the monarchy, her mother's life's work, was cast as the villain. So, I'll ask you directly, do you think the Oprah interview was an honest attempt to share their truth, or a weapon crafted to wound the monarchy? The world may never agree on the answer. But inside the palace, Anne's answer was clear. And she wasn't alone. Staff members, courtiers, and even some royals whispered the same thing, that this interview crossed a line. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. The pain wasn't just institutional. It was deeply personal. For Anne, watching her nephew, once the cheeky, lovable boy who called her Annie, sit there and accuse the family of cruelty was devastating. She wasn't just angry at Meghan. She was heartbroken by Harry. And yet, she didn't stop there. And allegedly pointed out that several of Meghan's claims were misleading, even inaccurate. And those inaccuracies, she believed, twisted the knife even deeper into the Queen's heart. And that's where we go next. Because Anne's fury wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the lies she believed were hidden in plain sight. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine being 94 years old. You've given your entire life to service, steadied your nation through wars, recessions, pandemics, and personal loss. And then, one evening, you turn on the television to see your grandson, your beloved Harry, accusing your family of racism, cruelty, and abandonment. That was the reality Queen Elizabeth faced in March 2021. For most people, the Oprah interview was entertainment, a global spectacle. But for the Queen, it was personal. It was raw. It was shattering. And according to Princess Anne, it cut deeper than anyone outside the palace could imagine. And, ever the blunt truth-teller, allegedly revealed that the Queen was not just hurt by the interview. She was devastated. Not as a monarch, not as a sovereign, but as a grandmother. This wasn't about reputational damage or constitutional fallout. This was about betrayal at the most intimate level. And for Anne, who has always fiercely protected her mother, that betrayal was unforgivable. Think about the Queen's relationship with Harry. From the moment he was born, she adored him. Photographs show her beaming at the cheeky little boy with fiery hair, always ready with a mischievous grin. Harry had a unique bond with the Queen. Unlike William, who bore the burden of future kingship, Harry was the spare, free from heavy expectation. He made her laugh. He charmed her. She saw in him not just a prince, but a grandson with a special spark. To see that boy, now a man, sit with Oprah and accuse her family of cruelty must have felt like being stabbed in the heart, and reportedly described her mother's reaction as one of profound sadness. The Queen wasn't known for tears, but those close to her hinted that the interview left her shaken in a way few events ever had. She had survived Diana's panorama interview, Andrew's disgrace, and countless royal scandals. But this was different. This was family turning against family. This was Harry, not a distant cousin or minor royal, but the Queen's own grandson, laying blame at her feet. And here's the part, and allegedly found most heartbreaking. Meghan and Harry's claim that the monarchy ignored Meghan's pleas for help. When Meghan told Oprah she was suicidal and denied support, the world gasped. But according to Anne, the Queen was crushed. Because if that claim were true, it would mean she, the head of the family, had failed not just as a sovereign, but as a human being. The Queen prided herself on compassion, on quietly supporting her family, and reportedly said her mother felt accused of neglect, and that wounded her deeply. And didn't stop there. She pointed out the irony. The Queen, a woman who spent her entire reign dedicating herself to service and empathy, was being painted as cold and unfeeling. And Anne, fiercely loyal, couldn't stand it. She told Confidants that her mother's pain was twofold. She was hurt by the words themselves, and she was hurt that Harry, of all people, would allow such a narrative to be broadcast to the world. Let's pause here. Think about the generational clash. The Queen belonged to an era of stiff upper lip, of duty before self, of silence in the face of struggle. Harry and Meghan, by contrast, belonged to an age of emotional openness, of public vulnerability, of speaking your truth. To the world, Meghan's revelations seemed brave. To the Queen, they seemed like betrayal dressed as confession. And Anne, who has spent her entire life modeling her mother's stoicism, saw it as nothing short of treason. Now picture the Queen at Windsor Castle, surrounded by her aides, watching the broadcast unfold. The cameras cut to Oprah's shocked expressions, Meghan's trembling voice, Harry's tense body language, each line landing like a blow. According to whispers from palace insiders, the Queen's silence was heavy, her expression unreadable. But behind that mask, and later revealed, her mother was heartbroken. She had weathered storms before, but this storm came from within her own family. And here's where Anne's words sting most. She allegedly confided that the Queen felt deceived, not just hurt, but misled, because some of Meghan and Harry's claims, in Anne's view, twisted the truth. The monarchy wasn't blameless, of course, and never pretended otherwise. But to accuse the family of racism, to suggest they denied protection to Archie, to claim they abandoned Meghan in crisis, these were distortions. And to the Queen, being accused of cruelty she did not commit was unbearable. Let me ask you directly, what would hurt you more? Being accused of something you did, or being accused of something you know you didn't? For the Queen, the second cut deepest. And Anne, who understood her mother better than anyone, knew it. That's why she called the interview not just damaging but cruel. And yet, the Queen did what she always did. She responded with restraint. Her forward phrase, "Recollections may vary," was measured, diplomatic, careful. But behind those words lay the truth and allegedly spoke aloud. Her mother was wounded in ways the public would never fully grasp. The irony here is almost unbearable. For decades, the Queen had been the unifier, the steady hand. Even in Diana's death, she was eventually seen as the one who held the monarchy together. But now, in her twilight years, the Queen was cast as the villain in her grandson's story. And knew her mother didn't deserve that. So what didn't do? She voiced the pain others were too polite to admit. She allegedly said her mother felt betrayed, not by enemies, but by her own blood. And that betrayal, and believed, left scars that no public statement could erase. But here's the cliffhanger. And didn't just reveal her mother's heartbreak. She went further. She allegedly listed the specific claims from the Oprah interview that she believed were inaccurate or misleading. And in doing so, she exposed cracks in Meghan and Harry's narrative that the world hadn't fully examined. And what came next would force us to question everything we thought we knew about that night. Were Meghan and Harry's words during the Oprah interview carefully chosen half-truths? That's the question Princess and allegedly posed behind palace doors. Because while the world gasped at Meghan's revelations and wasn't buying all of it, she reportedly told confidants that parts of the interview were misleading, exaggerated, even outright wrong. And that's where this story gets darker. It wasn't just that Anne believed Harry and Meghan had betrayed the family. It was that she believed they had twisted the truth in ways that made the monarchy look far worse than it really was. Let's start with one of the biggest bombshells, Archie's title. Meghan told Oprah that her son had been denied the title of prince, implying that race had played a role in the decision. Millions of viewers took that as evidence of discrimination. But Anne, steeped in royal protocol, knew that wasn't true. According to established rules laid out in 1917 by King George V, only the children and grandchildren of the monarch automatically receive the titles of prince or princess. Great-grandchildren, like Archie at the time, do not, unless specially decreed. The rules were clear, and reportedly fumed that Meghan presented this as an injustice, when in reality, it was simply constitutional tradition. For Anne, this wasn't a revelation, it was spin. Then came the issue of security. Meghan claimed Archie had been denied protection, again hinting that prejudice was at play. But Anne, who has spent her entire life under the same protocols, allegedly dismissed this as another distortion. Security, she pointed out, is tied not just to titles, but to active royal duties. Harry and Meghan had chosen to step back from working roles. With that choice came consequences. To Anne, Meghan's framing turned a bureaucratic decision into a sinister act of discrimination. And that, Anne believed, was unfair, not just to the monarchy, but to the Queen herself. Let's pause here. Ask yourself, if a claim can be technically true yet stripped of its context, does that make it dishonest? This is what Anne wrestled with. Meghan and Harry didn't invent facts, but they told them in a way that made the family look monstrous. And for Anne, that was the cruelest cut of all. But the most explosive claim, of course, was the one about race. Meghan said that while she was pregnant, there were concerns expressed by unnamed royals about how dark Archie's skin might be. The world erupted. Accusations of racism dominated headlines. Politicians weighed in. For the monarchy, it was catastrophic. Yet Anne allegedly confided that the truth wasn't so simple. Conversations about appearance, especially in a family obsessed with lineage, weren't unusual. But Meghan's framing suggested outright prejudice. And, furious, reportedly said this was not how the conversation happened. She didn't deny that remarks may have been made, but she believed Meghan twisted their meaning to inflame outrage. To Anne, this wasn't truth-telling. It was weaponizing family chatter for maximum impact. And then there was the claim about mental health. Meghan's admission that she was suicidal and that palace officials ignored her pleas for help drew global sympathy. But Anne, ever the pragmatist, allegedly questioned this too. Not the pain, and would never dismiss mental anguish, but the narrative that the monarchy simply turned its back. The Queen had always emphasized compassion within the family. To Anne, the suggestion that Meghan was left to suffer in silence didn't add up. She believed Meghan was dramatizing her struggles, turning personal isolation into a story of institutional cruelty. And in doing so, Anne believed Meghan had made her mother, the Queen, look heartless. That, Anne said, was unforgivable. Now, let's add Harry into the mix. His claim that Prince Charles had cut him off financially drew sympathy from viewers. But Anne, who has seen the financial structures of the monarchy firsthand, allegedly scoffed at this. Harry was no pauper. He inherited millions from Diana. He had access to private wealth. To suggest he was abandoned and believed was misleading. It painted Charles as callous when in reality, Harry had resources most people could only dream of, and reportedly told aides that this narrative of financial victimhood was dishonest. And here's the irony Anne couldn't ignore. Meghan and Harry painted themselves as victims of an institution that suffocated them. Yet they staged their grievances in the most public, glamorous way possible. They fled Britain for privacy, then signed multi-million-dollar media deals. And this contradiction exposed the truth. Meghan and Harry weren't victims. They were performers. The Oprah interview wasn't catharsis. It was strategy. And, blunt as ever, saw it clearly. But let me ask you, what hurts more? When someone tells an outright lie, or when someone twists a half-truth so convincingly that the world believes them? That's the pain and described. It wasn't just that Meghan and Harry attacked the monarchy. It was that they did so by bending facts just enough to make themselves look innocent and the family look cruel. That, and said, was betrayal layered with manipulation. And here's where the emotional twist comes in. The Queen, who believed in loyalty above all else, was painted as cold. Charles, who had tried to support his son, was painted as heartless. William, who carried the weight of duty, was painted as trapped. Every member of the family came away diminished. And saw this not as coincidence, but as design. She believed Meghan and Harry had orchestrated the interview to control the narrative, to win the sympathy of the world, and to burn every bridge behind them. But this raised another chilling question. If Meghan and Harry could spin the truth so effectively, what else had they exaggerated? What else had been left out? What other secrets might they twist for the cameras? And warned that the Oprah interview wasn't the end of the betrayal, it was only the beginning. And that's where we turn next. Because the fallout from Meghan and Harry's words didn't just damage reputations, it created chaos inside the palace walls. Staff panicked. Courtiers scrambled. The Queen was forced into damage control. And Anne, watching it all unfold, grew angrier than ever. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Picture the halls of Buckingham Palace in the hours after the Oprah interview aired. Phones ringing nonstop. Aides pacing the corridors with urgent memos. Senior staff huddled in dimly lit offices, trying to figure out what to say, what to release, what to deny. It wasn't just a storm, it was chaos. For the monarchy, which thrives on control, routine, and discipline, the interview ripped through the institution like wildfire. And at the center of that firestorm sat Queen Elizabeth, blindsided and wounded, while Princess Anne simmered with fury. And, according to whispers from insiders, saw the interview as a declaration of war. Not an emotional outburst, not a miscommunication, but a deliberate act of betrayal. And the proof was in the fallout. The palace wasn't scrambling because Meghan and Harry had expressed sadness. The palace was scrambling because they had turned sadness into accusations, and accusations into an international scandal. Now think about the staff, the so-called men in gray suits, who keep the monarchy running like a well-oiled machine. Overnight, they were cast as villains, the faceless bureaucracy that, according to Meghan, denied her help when she was suicidal, stripped Archie of titles, and refused to protect the family. Imagine the shock among those staff members, many of whom had quietly served the monarchy for decades. Suddenly, they weren't loyal courtiers. They were painted as cold-hearted bureaucrats complicit in racism and cruelty. And, who has always respected staff and values loyalty, allegedly bristled at this portrayal. She knew many of them personally. To see their reputations destroyed in front of millions enraged her. But the biggest blow came from Meghan and Harry's claims about racism. That allegation didn't just sting, it threatened the very legitimacy of the monarchy. Within hours of the interview, headlines across the world screamed about racism inside Buckingham Palace. Politicians demanded answers. Social media exploded. In America especially, the conversation shifted quickly. The monarchy wasn't just an outdated institution, it was a racist one. And, who has spent her life serving Commonwealth nations, many with large black populations, allegedly felt this accusation could destroy the family's global role. To her, the fallout wasn't temporary. It was existential. Inside the palace, statements were drafted and redrafted. Some senior aides pushed for a strong denial. Others urged calm. The Queen, true to form, insisted on restraint. The result was a 61-word statement that would become one of the most famous of her reign. Recollections may vary. It was short. It was diplomatic. But it was also devastating. Because between those lines was the truth the palace dared not say outright. Meghan and Harry's claims were disputed. And however, wasn't satisfied. Diplomacy wasn't her style. She wanted the palace to hit back harder, to defend the queen and expose the inaccuracies. But the monarchy doesn't fight wars in public. It never has. And that frustrated and more than anything. Because while the palace maintained its dignity, the world bought into Meghan and Harry's version of events. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever felt trapped in silence while someone else told a story about you? Imagine knowing their story is twisted, but being unable to defend yourself because dignity demands restraint. That's what and in the royal family endured. And in that silence, Meghan and Harry's narrative grew louder, stronger, and harder to combat. The fallout also fractured relationships inside the family. Prince William, visibly angry, told reporters that the royals were very much not a racist family. But behind closed doors, his fury at Harry simmered. Charles was humiliated, his reputation as a father shredded. And the Queen, though outwardly calm, bore the weight of her family's implosion. And, watching her brother and nephew clash, saw the damage as irreparable. And then came the staff resignations. In the weeks following the interview, reports surfaced of palace aides stepping down, exhausted by the pressure. Some had even been accused by Meghan of bullying, allegations which added fuel to the fire. And this was yet another twist of the knife. Loyal staff, who had served with quiet dedication, were being dragged into the mud, and the palace's silence left them defenseless. Here's the irony and couldn't ignore. Meghan and Harry claimed they had been silenced. Yet in that moment, it was the palace that was silent, and Meghan and Harry who controlled the narrative. And allegedly told confidants this was the greatest failure of the entire crisis, that by refusing to speak more openly, the family allowed themselves to be painted as villains. But Anne's fury wasn't only directed at Meghan. She was equally angry with Harry, because in her eyes, Meghan couldn't have done this alone. Harry knew the palace. He knew the rules. He knew the cost of going public, and yet he went along with it. He sat beside Meghan and nodded as she spoke. He added his own grievances. For Anne, this wasn't just Meghan's betrayal. It was Harry's too, and that cut deeper than anything else. So here's the haunting question. Could the monarchy have prevented this fallout? Could they have acted sooner, spoken louder, fought harder? Or was the damage inevitable the moment Meghan and Harry sat down with Oprah? Anne's view was clear. She allegedly said the interview was designed to create chaos, and chaos was exactly what it achieved. But what came next would make Anne's fury even more personal. Because this wasn't just about the monarchy as an institution. This was about Harry himself, the boy she once adored, the nephew she watched grow up. And in Anne's eyes, his betrayal wasn't just shocking. It was heartbreaking. And that is where we go next. For Princess Anne, the Oprah interview wasn't only about Meghan. It was about Harry. And that's what made the whole saga cut deeper than any scandal she had seen before. Because this wasn't some distant cousin embarrassing the monarchy. This wasn't Andrew sinking the family in shame. This was her nephew, the cheeky, mischievous boy who used to make his grandmother laugh, who once symbolized the warm, human side of the royal family. The boy she had watched grow up in the shadow of tragedy. And Harry wasn't just another royal. He was family. Which made his role in the Oprah interview not just betrayal, but heartbreak. Let's rewind to Anne's relationship with Harry. She was never the doting, overly affectionate aunt. Anne's style has always been practical, no nonsense, and tough. But she was protective. She saw Harry as spirited, full of life, the one who brought laughter into otherwise stiff royal gatherings. After Diana's death, she understood the darkness that hovered over him and William. She admired his energy, his military service, his ability to connect with ordinary people. In many ways, she respected that Harry was more real than most royals. But she also saw his weaknesses, his impulsiveness, his occasional self-pity, his struggle with the balance between duty and freedom. And when Meghan entered his life, and sharp instincts allegedly told her one thing, trouble, and is said to have warned family members early on that Harry was being swept away by Meghan's charm. She reportedly believed Meghan didn't understand, or perhaps didn't care about, the rigid demands of royal duty. And in Harry, she saw a man too eager to escape his responsibilities. So when Harry chose to step back from royal life, and wasn't surprised. But the Oprah interview? That, she said, was unforgivable. Because Harry, unlike Meghan, knew what he was doing. He knew the palace. He knew the queen. He knew the rules. He had been raised inside the institution. For him to sit there and paint the family as cruel was, in Anne's view, the ultimate betrayal. Think about Harry's words. He told Oprah that his father had cut him off financially, that his relationship with William was strained, that his family hadn't supported Meghan. Those weren't Meghan's claims, they were his. And that's what Anne couldn't accept. Because for Anne, Harry's loyalty should have been to the Queen above all else. Whatever his frustrations, she believed he owed his grandmother's silence, not public condemnation. He owed his father respect, not humiliation. And he owed his brother protection, not estrangement. Yet in those 2 hours with Oprah, he burned every bridge, and allegedly described Harry as lost. Not just lost to the monarchy, but lost to the family. She saw him abandoning the very values he had been raised with: loyalty, duty, discretion. And to her, that wasn't just rebellion, it was weakness. And has no patience for self-pity. She has endured criticism, unflattering headlines, and personal struggles, all without airing them in public. She believes in stoicism. Harry, in her eyes, chose vulnerability not as strength, but as performance. He weaponized his pain for sympathy. And for Anne, that was shameful. Now let's consider the Queen's perspective, as Anne revealed it. The Queen adored Harry. But after the interview, she was reportedly heartbroken by his words, and allegedly confided that her mother felt not only betrayed, but deceived. That Harry had twisted family tensions into accusations that hurt her personally. For Anne, watching the Queen suffer because of her grandson was unbearable, and she placed the blame squarely on Harry. Meghan might have lit the match, but Harry, and believed, had carried the torch. Ask yourself this. Have you ever seen a family member turn against the very people who raised them, choosing instead to side with outsiders? That's how Anne saw Harry. She believed he had abandoned his heritage, his duty, and even his grandmother, for the sake of television deals and public sympathy. It wasn't just disloyalty, it was betrayal of blood. And here's where Anne's anger deepened. Harry framed himself as powerless, cut off, alone. But Anne knew better. Harry was wealthy. Harry was privileged. Harry had options. To Anne, for him to sit there and portray himself as a victim of cruelty was disingenuous. She allegedly told confidants that Harry wasn't a victim. He was a deserter. He had walked away from duty and then blamed the institution for the consequences. And to her, that was cowardice. Yet beneath her anger lay something far more tragic: disappointment. And had once believed Harry might be the monarchy's saving grace. The prince who connected with veterans, who spoke openly about mental health, who could modernize the family. But the Harry she saw on Oprah wasn't that man. He was bitter, resentful, consumed by grievance. And that broke her heart. Let me ask you, what's worse? When an outsider attacks your family, or when someone inside, someone you love, joins the attack? For Anne, the answer was obvious. Meghan's accusations hurt, but Harry's betrayal shattered her. Because it confirmed her worst fear, that the monarchy's wounds weren't inflicted from without, but from within. And so Anne began to see Harry not as the cheeky boy she once adored, but as a man she could no longer trust. In her eyes, he had betrayed the Queen. He had betrayed his father. He had betrayed William. He had betrayed the staff who had served him. And perhaps most painfully of all, he had betrayed the memory of Diana, because Anne allegedly believed Diana would never have condoned her son turning against the family so publicly. But here's where the story twists again. Because Anne's anger at Harry wasn't new. She had seen warning signs long before the Oprah interview. She had predicted trouble years earlier. And when the interview aired, she wasn't just furious. She was vindicated. Because as Anne saw it, she had warned the family. She had sounded the alarm. And they hadn't listened. But what came next would prove just how right she had been, and how costly it was to ignore her warnings. From the very beginning, Princess Anne had doubts. Not about Harry's heart, but about his choices. And especially about Meghan. While the world swooned at the fairy tale wedding in 2018, the glamorous American actress marrying the prince, and saw past the glitter. According to whispers inside the palace, she was among the first to warn that Meghan would struggle with royal life, and that Harry, blinded by love and desperation, would ignore every red flag, and had spent her whole life inside the royal machine. She knew what it demanded: the rigid routines, the loss of privacy, the relentless duty. She had lived it, breathed it, survived it. And she knew instantly that Meghan, ambitious, outspoken, independent, wasn't cut out for it. Meghan wasn't wrong to want freedom. But freedom is not the monarchy's currency. Duty is. And allegedly warned family members that Meghan would never adapt. She saw it from day one. Let's rewind to those early days. Meghan's charm was undeniable. She dazzled the public, spoke with ease, lit up the cameras. She seemed to bring fresh energy to the monarchy, and wasn't impressed by charisma. She valued grit. Meghan might have captured Harry's heart, and reportedly questioned whether she could shoulder the burden of royal life. Meghan seemed too Hollywood, too eager for the spotlight, too quick to see the monarchy as a cage rather than a calling. And here's where Anne's bluntness comes into play. She didn't keep her thoughts to herself. Insiders suggest she raised concerns, privately, yes, but firmly. She warned Charles. She warned courtiers. She may even have warned the Queen. She said, in her matter-of-fact way, that this union would cause trouble, not because Meghan was evil, but because Meghan was different. Too different. And Harry, in Anne's view, wasn't strong enough to bridge that difference. But nobody listened. Why? Because the palace wanted a happy ending. They wanted a modern fairy tale after years of scandal. William and Kate were already steady and reliable. Harry and Meghan could be the glamour, the sparkle, the global stars. So Anne's warnings were brushed aside. She was branded old-fashioned, too harsh, out of touch. People said she didn't understand Meghan's world. They said she was being unfair. Anne had seen this movie before. She remembered the turbulence of Diana. She remembered the strains that broke Charles's marriage. She knew how unforgiving the monarchy could be to outsiders who weren't prepared. And she knew trouble when she saw it. Fast forward just a few years, and everything Anne predicted came true. The rift, the step back, the relocation to America, the explosive interview. To Anne, it was vindication. She had sounded the alarm, and the family ignored her. And now they were living in the wreckage. But here's the irony. Anne never wanted to be right. Her warnings weren't spiteful. They were protective. She didn't despise Meghan. She distrusted the fit. She didn't resent Harry. She feared for him. But when her words went unheeded, she pulled back. And is not the type to gloat. She doesn't do "I told you so." Instead, she quietly watched as the prophecy unfolded exactly as she had described. And yet, Anne's frustration simmered. Because the fallout wasn't just Harry's problem. It wasn't just Meghan's problem. It was the monarchy's problem. The Queen's problem. Britain's problem. The Commonwealth's problem. And allegedly told aides that the cost of ignoring her had been catastrophic. What could have been managed privately had now exploded publicly. And the monarchy, once untouchable, was suddenly fragile. Let me ask you, have you ever given advice that no one wanted to hear, only to be proven right later? That's Anne's story in this saga. She saw the train wreck coming. She warned about it. But no one stopped it. And when it finally crashed, she wasn't triumphant. She was furious. Furious that her mother had been hurt. Furious that her nephew had strayed. Furious that the monarchy she had served her entire life was left picking up the pieces. And here's the part that stings most. Anne's warnings weren't vague. They were specific. She allegedly said Meghan would struggle with the loss of freedom. She said Harry would resent the restrictions. She said their frustrations would spill out publicly. And she said the monarchy wasn't prepared for the storm. Every prediction was spot on. And when the Oprah interview aired, Anne felt it wasn't just betrayal. It was confirmation of everything she had feared. But here's the chilling twist. Anne didn't just warn about Meghan and Harry. She also warned about the media circus that would follow. She allegedly predicted that once they left, they would weaponize their story, turning their pain into profit. And when the Oprah interview aired, that prophecy too came true. Which brings us to the next part of this story, the media frenzy. Because the interview wasn't just a family betrayal, it was a global spectacle. And Anne, who has always despised celebrity culture, was appalled by how her nephew and his wife used pain as performance. And what came next would confirm Anne's darkest suspicion, that Harry and Meghan weren't just victims of the media. They had learned to exploit it. From the moment Oprah's special was announced, the media went into overdrive. Trailers teased Meghan's trembling voice, Oprah's wide-eyed gasps, and Harry's tense demeanor. The interview was marketed like a Hollywood blockbuster, an event, not just a conversation. That alone infuriated Princess Anne. For her, Royal life was supposed to be about service, not spectacle. Yet here was her nephew and his wife turning their grievances into global entertainment. And, who despises the limelight unless it's strictly for duty, allegedly saw the Oprah interview as the ultimate surrender to celebrity culture. And in her blunt view, Meghan and Harry weren't escaping the media, they were exploiting it. She reportedly called the interview a performance for profit, a show designed not just to tell their truth, but to maximize ratings, sympathy, and brand value. And if you look at the facts, and wasn't entirely wrong. CBS paid millions for the rights to air the interview. Advertisers paid top dollar for slots. Oprah's production company reaped the rewards. And Meghan and Harry? They cemented themselves as international media powerhouses. But let's rewind. Why did the media seize on this interview with such ferocity? Because it had everything. Royal drama, claims of racism, mental health struggles, a fairy tale romance turned nightmare. It was a perfect storm of tabloid bait and cultural commentary. Every newspaper, every TV channel, every podcast dissected it line by line. And in that frenzy, and saw something dark. Her family's pain transformed into a global circus. And there was nothing noble about it. Meghan and Harry insisted they wanted privacy, yet they invited the entire world into their marriage, their pain, their grievances, and saw this as hypocrisy. She believed Meghan and Harry were not protecting their privacy, they were monetizing their story. And the media, hungry for clicks and views, played along. The interview wasn't just broadcast. It was rebroadcast, clipped, analyzed, spun into endless headlines. For weeks, you couldn't open a paper without seeing Meghan's face or Harry's accusations. And here's where Anne's anger deepened. She had lived her entire life with headlines, but she had never sold herself to them. She once famously scolded photographers with a curt "naff off," and she meant it. She had endured scrutiny, but never played into it. Meghan and Harry, she believed, had crossed a line by turning their story into entertainment. They didn't just tell the world what happened, they staged it, edited it, presented it for maximum dramatic effect. That, and thought, wasn't courage. It was manipulation. Now let's think about the audience. Millions tuned in not just for information, but for drama. They gasped when Meghan spoke of suicidal thoughts. They leaned forward when Harry described being financially cut off. They speculated endlessly about the identity of the royal, who asked about Archie's skin tone. The interview was consumed like reality television. And for Anne, that was the greatest humiliation of all. The monarchy, her mother's life's work, reduced to entertainment fodder. And the irony? Meghan and Harry presented themselves as victims of the media, hounded, scrutinized, treated unfairly. Yet here they were, willingly feeding the very beast they claimed had destroyed them. And this contradiction revealed everything. They weren't rejecting the media. They were weaponizing it. Their pain became their product. Their grievances became their brand. And the Oprah interview was their launchpad into a new career as celebrity storytellers. But ask yourself this. If you take your most intimate struggles and turn them into global content, are you telling your truth, or are you selling it? That's the question, and posed in private, and it's one that still lingers today. The fallout proved her point. Days after the interview, Meghan and Harry's media deals dominated headlines. Netflix, Spotify, Apple TV. Multi-million-dollar contracts flowed their way. Critics accused them of cashing in on their royal ties. And for Anne, the timing was damning. The interview wasn't just catharsis. It was strategy. It set the stage for their brand, their documentaries, their podcasts. And in Anne's eyes, it came at the expense of the Queen's dignity. Let's pause here. Imagine giving your entire life to service, refusing interviews, rejecting the glamour of celebrity, only to watch your nephew use the monarchy's struggles as a stepping stone into Hollywood fame. That's the betrayal Anne felt. It wasn't just that Harry and Meghan told their story. It was that they used the monarchy's reputation as currency. They aired private grievances, left out critical context, and framed themselves as martyrs, all while building their new empire. And allegedly described it as selling the family for ratings. Strong words, but fitting. Because from her perspective, that's exactly what it was. And it wasn't just humiliating, it was dangerous. Every accusation amplified by the media didn't just damage family relationships. It weakened the monarchy itself. International trust in the crown dipped. Commonwealth nations questioned their ties. Conversations about abolishing the monarchy gained momentum. To end, this wasn't just about scandal. It was about survival. But here's where the story twists again. Because while the media frenzy raged, another battle brewed inside the palace. A battle not over reputation, but over truth. Private conversations, and claimed, had been twisted beyond recognition. And in her mind, the most damaging part of the Oprah interview wasn't what was said in public, it was what had been leaked from behind closed doors. And what came next would prove even more explosive than the interview itself. What if I told you that some of the most explosive parts of Meghan and Harry's Oprah interview weren't entirely born in that California garden, but were rooted in private conversations that had happened behind palace walls, and that princess and believe those conversations were twisted beyond recognition? That's WHE.